This is the Mormon Mixed Faith Marriage Podcast with certified life coach Brooke Booth, episode number 100. So, in honor of our 100th episode, I'm going to share a little bit more of my own story. Recently, I've had a few people just ask me questions, personal questions. Hey, how do you handle this? What do you think of this? How's this been for you? And I'm thinking I'd be happy to share that here on the podcast. I just sent my kids outside. This is the last week for us before school starts. I know many of you have probably already started school. They've been like thundering down the hallway here outside my office. So I send them outside. Hopefully we can record this podcast with some quiet. But if you hear thundering outside, don't worry, school starts next week. Okay. I've been thinking a lot about this mixed faith marriage I'm in and what it's taught me about me, what it's taught me about marriage and my marriage. And it's been really interesting to look at it through the lens of learning about me as opposed to just like, how do we figure this out? Like, how do we deal with, tithing and baptisms? But like looking at it from a slightly different lens of like, okay, we've been in this for some years now. What have I learned about me? What have I learned about our marriage? And that's how I want to approach this episode. So I think back to when I was a kid, and I was a really obedient kid. Obedience came really easy for me. I could get it. I mean, it was easy for me. I wanted to be safe, and obedience seemed like my ticket to safety. And I was a really obedient adult as a result. I didn't question things. Which is funny now that I've had a faith transition, but I didn't question things. And I didn't even want to question things. That wasn't, some people have a lot of questions naturally and doubts really early on. That was not me. That was not me. I was recently listening to a clinician named Dr. Becky Kennedy. I would highly recommend her parenting book called Good Inside. If you're looking for a parenting book, this is me giving a plug for her parenting book. But I was listening to her and she was talking about how when we're like compliant kids are often praised by other adults, their parents are praised. Oh, you must be such good parents. You have such a good kid. And really what they're just saying is this kid's really compliant, really pliable, really easy for me to deal with as an adult, not giving me any trouble. And she was commenting how when kids, like when they're little, we want them to when they go to a new situation, like she was talking about, like a gymnastics class, we want them to like unquestionably go with this strange adult and unquestionably follow this strange adult into a new environment and do whatever this strange adult tells them to do. And we don't want them to question it. We don't want them to throw a fit. We don't want them to be afraid or scared or shy. We want them just to be compliant and to just do that. But at the same time, when they're teenagers, we want them to question things. Like we don't want them to just go with the crowd and go to a party and just drink because everybody else is drinking. We want them to question that and to like ask that inner voice inside of them that may be questioning if this is what they want to do. And then as adults, we want them to be, advocating for themselves and asking for the raise and asking for the promotion and going after their dreams. And she makes this point that those things aren't congruent. Like if we create a kid, we want them to be compliant and we praise that behavior and we can like want that. And then like we want them to be fundamentally different when they're a teenager, when they're an adult. Like that's not a fair ask. And it's not a congruent way for the kid to receive. Like it's a confusing thing for the kid when we expect compliance, but then we expect them to not be compliant at the same time. And I'm sharing this because this really applies to how I think about my own experience. I was that really compliant kid. And so when I was an adult, it was really hard for me to advocate for myself, to advocate for my preferences, to even be able to feel like I had permission to explore what they were and to be okay recognizing that maybe I had a different opinion or that certain situations didn't make me comfortable. Because when I was a kid, I was so good at just ignoring that. I was good at not, if I did feel uncomfortable about something, going with strangers to a strange room, for gymnastics or church or whatever, I was really good at ignoring that and squelching that and just being really obedient. And so as I became an adult, it led me to be really good at being a people pleaser, ignoring what I wanted to make sure other people got what they wanted. Making sure other people were comfortable, even if that meant I was uncomfortable, making sure other people were convenienced, even if that meant I was inconvenienced. And this is also how a lot of women are socialized, but so I sort of got how women are socialized plus this obedient, like what I want doesn't matter, just follow along and don't rock the boat. And so, like I said earlier, I got pretty good at ignoring my own preferences and listening to that voice inside of me. And in many ways, this worked, right? I grew up to be a very responsible adult. I went to school, got an education, went to BYU, went on a mission, obedient missionary, jumped through all the hoops, got great grades. Like in many ways, great. It worked really well for me. I'm educated. I'm married. I have kids. I pay my bills. I save money, right? My house is clean most of the time. Like in many ways, my obedience and my ability to be conforming and pliable, right? It got me a lot of the things that we do consider to be signs of success and respectability. But it also, I never differentiated as a teenager. I never really explored myself. I never really explored options. I never pushed boundaries. I never thought about my own desires or preferences. I always played it really safe. And there's a price you pay for that. Like you get a good kid, like I was. I was easy. I was a good kid. I didn't cause my parents much stress. But the price I paid, and I'm not saying it's a terrible price, but there is a price, and the price I paid that instead of differentiating when I was, 17 or 18 by going to a party or whatever, I differentiated when I was like 36, right? in part by having a faith transition and, deciding that I needed to step away from church and that I needed to take a break from that. And it's interesting to look at how it really was just a way of me asking myself questions I'd never given myself permission to ask before. Like, this is what I mean when I said earlier, like, it's so interesting to look at like what I've learned about myself from my mixed faith marriage. And this is definitely something I've learned about myself is I really had to develop the skill to know myself, know my preferences, to be able to hear that voice inside of me again that asked questions and that had concerns and that wasn't comfortable in some situations. I really had to come to know that part of myself that has preferences and desires and to listen to that part of myself again. I had ignored it for a very long time. And that's part of differentiation, and that's part of a faith transition, I think, in many ways. For me, it was anyway. But what I also saw is whenever there is differentiation, whether this is like a 17-year-old or a 36-year-old or whoever it is, it's kind of scary. People don't talk about years of differentiation like, oh, and then it was so wonderful when my child started to differentiate. It was just such a lovely time for the family and everybody. Like, it's not talked about that way because it is often scary. It's scary when our kids start to feel out who they are and what they want and what their options are and what the boundaries are. And guess what? It was scary when I did this at 36 too. Scary for my husband. It was scary for my peers. I'm sure it was scary for my parents. I know it was scary for me. Because it's scary when we don't do what others want us to do. It's scary, especially when that's something like for me that I'd always really done. And guess what else? It's really scary to stop pretending to be somebody that you've been pretending to be for a really long time. Scary stuff. It's scary to let others, like people you really care about and want to love and accept you, it's scary to let them see parts of you that you've kept hidden away from them and from yourself for a really long time. Much of my mixed faith marriage recently has, well, and all along, but definitely recently, has been a lot of work around accepting myself and my preferences and what I'm okay with and what I'm not okay with and what I want and what I don't want. And being okay that I'm somebody who has preferences. And that doesn't make me selfish or bad or mean or a bad mom or a bad wife. It actually makes me who I am. It makes me interesting. It makes me Brooke. It's been interesting to accept myself, to be brave enough to explore that part of myself, and to be brave enough to give others the opportunity to know that part of myself, and to give them an opportunity to get to know that part of myself and to learn to love that part of myself too. Right now in my marriage, we rarely talk about religion. Like, we're not talking about Joseph Smith or polygamy or the Book of Abraham. Like, we don't talk about those things. Not really an issue for us. We let each other do our own thing as far as faith, but we do talk about this stuff a lot. I've been actively working on deciding what I want in my marriage. We went on a walk yesterday and I was telling my husband, Daniel, that I'm like really exploring this question in ways I never have before. Like, what do I want in this marriage? Because I've never really asked myself that. I just did what I was told. I just did what I was told I wanted. I never really explored the question further. So it's really interesting the conversations we're having now around, what do I want in this marriage as far as time together, as far as conversations, intellectual connection, physical connection, emotional connection. Like, what do I want? Not to say that then I have to like mandate it and make it happen, but even just to start giving myself permission to explore what my preferences are, so then I can articulate them and discuss them and bring them to the table and see if that's something that even makes sense for us both. I realize that I'm really good at like fulfilling roles. What I mean by that is I'm good at doing the tasks associated with wife and mother. Like, I'm good at doing, the house and the meals and the planning and all of that. But that's very different. Those skills of fulfilling roles are fundamentally different than the skills needed to build and create a relationship. And I used to think that they were one and the same. I'm getting better at showing up not as the pretend version of me, but as the real, undiluted, unmasked version of Brooke. And in part because I've been so much better at exploring myself and asking myself questions that I just never gave myself permission to ask before. Um, you know, examples that I just gave, but like, how much time do I want to spend together? What do I want to talk about? Do I want to raise or lower expectations in certain categories of my marriage or my life? Like, really giving myself permission to ask questions that I've never, ever considered asking before. I was really good at just being driven by the shoulds. And I notice I still am. A lot of times when I ask these questions, I'm like, okay, is this just a should sneaking in, or is this what I really think about this situation? So this is like, if I were to, sit down and talk to you about where I am in my mixed faith marriage, this is what I'd probably settle on. Is it's really been an interesting opportunity to get to know me, to take some time, energy, and effort to find out, what do I want in marriage? What do I want as a mother? What do I want as a wife? What what have I learned about myself going through this process? Do I like that? Do I not like it? Do I want, like, I love the question of like, when I start to really explore an area, like, am I okay with that? Are these like, do I want to change expectations here? Do I want to raise them? Do I want to lower them? So many interesting areas of self exploration and therefore self development and opportunities for self acceptance, for self respect, for self love. I hear a lot of times when people start doing work like this, they're afraid that they're being selfish, that by focusing on themselves and their preferences, that they're going to somehow just completely forget other people exist in this world and are going to somehow become like bulldozers and, ignore their children, ignore their spouse. And I honestly don't think that's the case, certainly not from my own experience. I find as I give myself permission to be a person and to acknowledge I'm a person and I have preferences and wants and desires and dreams and hopes, and that those are okay to explore and own and even be proud of. It gives me permission to like honor other people doing that same thing. And it gives me permission to not be threatened when other people do that as well, to not feel like that's a threat to me or to my stability or my safety as I'm in relationship with them. So as I think about, so we've been in this mixed faith marriage, I want to say it was like 2018-ish when we started. For the first little bit, it was definitely triage, little bit of lots of fear and concern. And as we've developed and mellowed, I'm really enjoying this phase of the work where I'm able to get to know me a little bit better, because then I'm able to bring more of me to the relationship and give my husband an opportunity to get to know me if that's something he's interested in. I've been surprised at how much I've enjoyed getting to know me and how much I've enjoyed being being the recipient of my own curiosity and my own interest and my own permission to just be who I am. All right, if you are working on your mixed faith marriage, and I suspect you are, just like me, I'm going to invite you to go and check out my course. It is, well, this is me just being honest. I think it's crazy amazing. It's helped me personally. I put it together just knowing, like based on my years of experience with my own marriage and working with clients, that this is truly some of the most important tools that you can develop to really have a good foundation to build the kind of mixed faith marriage that can be sustainable and loving and connecting. To go check out my course at brookeboothcoaching.com. And I wish you the very best in your mixed faith marriage.